Okay, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
It's
Just
really
starting
nice to
my work
talk to you
day.
today. Yeah, so before we start, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Catriona Scott, and I am an iOS engineer at Stripe. I've been here for about 2 years, and I work on the Terminal team, and Terminal is our card present product. So I work with actual card readers, and you'd see our product in actual brick and mortar stores.
Okay, so before we talk more about your job, could you tell me a little bit about your career path and education?
Yeah, so I went to university at University of Washington, which is in Seattle. And I originally went in thinking that I was going to do psychology or neurobiology because I always found psychology super interesting. Um, During my orientation, I went to a lecture on engineering because I also really loved math, but I didn't want to major in math because yes, you can do other things with math, but I was like, am I going to be a math teacher? I don't want to be a teacher. And so went to the engineering one and I was like, whoa, there's so many different types of engineering, and bioengineering specifically caught my eye. Now at UW, you have to apply to your major. So you have to take a whole bunch of
Oh,
prerequisite classes in order to even apply to any of the engineering majors because it's technically a separate sub college of the entire university. So part of my prereq for actually applying to BioE was Intro to Computer Science, which at the time I thought was very funny. I had never done programming before. The only things I had heard about programming were from classmates who had taken the IB CS class and they thought it was terrible. So thought it was funny, didn't think I was like, cool, I'll do it. Ended up loving the class. I had to take Intro to Programming too, and happened to be pretty decent at it. So, and I was in an honors section, so I got to meet with the professor like 15 to 1, which given how big UW is, the class size is like 150 plus, so that's a huge deal. And I remember asking him after one of our honors sections, what do I do with computer science? Because I just legitimately didn't know. He's like, the cool thing is you can literally do whatever you want because almost everyone, sorry, our
it's
cleaning
fine. It's fine. Don't worry.
might, okay. Um, so we, sorry. So in the honors course, I asked him, he's like, the cool thing about computer science is that it can be applied to almost every industry needs computer science to some level. So it basically means you can work in whatever area of like the world you want to some degree. And he encouraged me to go talk to an advisor and actually apply. So I went, I applied, got in, still didn't know what I was doing. I literally walked in on one of the days that we had a career fair and didn't even know it was a thing. What did applying to internships look like? Had no idea. I happened to be a TA for our Intro to Java programming course my sophomore year, and I had a professor who recommended me to interview for a Google internship. And it was one for people who had 2 more years left of school, which I technically didn't, but I was almost going to double major. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be here for 2 more years. I can apply. And ended up getting it. I failed all my other internship interviews that quarter because I hadn't taken data structures and algorithms and I was ill prepared. But that very much, as you can imagine, opened doors. And so then I went on to intern at Google one more time in the Zurich office, visited the London office a lot. It was great. And then went to Facebook in Menlo Park. I ended up going full time to Facebook because I liked that Facebook was a little bit faster, a little bit move fast, break things, really liked the mentality. Was there for 2 years and a quarter, worked on Messenger as well as the ads platform. Then I moved over to Uber and I worked on the India growth team and then mobile platform. And then lastly, moved to Stripe 2 years ago. And I've been on the terminal team, which, as I mentioned earlier, is our card present solution. So actual physical card readers, you're going to use this in a store, and have focused primarily on the iOS SDK, but I'm now on the global team. So have been working with various team members to get us launched. We actually launched in the UK June of last year, which is exciting. So we're now in 8 countries, whereas the rest of Stripe, I think, is in 40 or 50. So we're just trying to catch up to where the rest of Stripe is. So that's sort of my like entire progression from college, how I fell into computer science, and then where I've worked over the last 7.5 years post-college.
Oh, wow. Okay. What exactly does Stripe do?
So Stripe is
I've
a,
briefly heard of them. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of people like to call us Square. I'm like, that's the other famous company. So Stripe, which y'all might have heard about, started by the Collison brothers. They're actually from Ireland. Started as a payments processing company. So what happened is John and Patrick work on a different startup and they're like, wow, why are payments so hard to accept on websites? This is an obscene amount of work that I have to do to get this spun up. So they saw an opportunity to, hey, can we create a super simple API so people can literally copy paste like 2 lines of code in order to accept payments on their website. So that's very much where it started, was like purely payment processing for websites. It's now sort of grown to be a whole suite of not just payment processing, because there's a bit of a market cap there, but also software as a service for anything that a business might need that touches money. So we have fraud detection services. We have this thing called Sigma, which allows you to sort of run queries over your payments data so you can analyze how people are spending. We have this entire dashboard that you can see all your payments. Terminal is just another vector through which you can accept payments, because a lot of people have an online presence as well as a brick and mortar presence. I think, what are the other, we do card issuing. So if you're an Instacart and you're like, I want to go give a credit card to the person that's shopping with like a pre-filled amount, you can actually issue them cards via our issuing platform. And so just think of anything that you might need money for business. Like, we try to help make that super easy, as well as also actually processing your payments. Billing is another big one. So setting up billing and recurring billing is actually not a straightforward process at all in subscription. So we also offer that sort of as like, we have multiple different SaaS platforms, as well as the just wrote like, yes, we also do payments processing. And the idea is that we're very global. And so if you want to launch, you're like, cool, I'm launching this business in the UK, tomorrow I want to go to France. It's literally just a checkbox that you enable, versus previously, and this is the work that we do, there's so many separate payments regulations between all of these different countries that if each individual business had to do themselves, it's like years of like months and months worth of work. So if we can make it easy for you to also just expand your business outside of your country, and we do all the certification, we deal with all the legislation for you, so that for you it's just a checkbox that you turn on. I think that's our other huge value add, and where we differ from like a Square. PayPal is pretty international, but they also have like their specific payment method. Yeah, so that's sort of where like Stripe is within payments ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So could you talk me through like a project that you've worked on? It doesn't have to be at Stripe, but like just the process that you took with your team to make it.
Yeah. Is there any sort of like, I'm trying to think, I have a few I could choose.
Yeah, you can think.
Is there any, so in terms of like the process, like sort of how do we start from here's our goal and actually get it launched? Cool. Yeah. I can actually talk through sort of my most recent project, which started in 2019 at this point. So as I mentioned, I'm on the Terminal Global team, and a lot of my charter for the project that I was working on was bringing a new reader type to countries that Terminal had not pre-existed in before. And so something that I didn't realize is we have to go through a certification process with every single new reader, which makes sense. You're dealing with people's money. There should be a standard, and each different card brand actually has its own certification process. So Visa, MasterCard, and Amex are your big three. And then there's sort of local card methods. So like France has carte bancaire, Germany has Girocard. Each one of those is a separate certification. So step number one was actually building code so we could go through the certification, because there were certain payment flows that are different from the US, and everything was built US first, that we just didn't support. So that was step number one. And that was very much just me working on the project, working on the code, and we have a team that does the certification. Next step was to globalize our SDK. So we have a concept of a configuration that lives on the reader itself, and the config actually needs to be different by country. And we had no mechanism for actually changing the config by country. And so at that point, there were four other of my teammates ended up joining my team, and I ended up leading the project, working with backend, Android, as well as other teams, to make API changes so that we could actually change configs based on countries and automatically do so, which also resulted in actual SDK changes for the public SDK. So one of the things that's a little bit more interesting or unique about Stripe, we're not just an app, we own an SDK, right? So every single time we're thinking about making SDK, which is software development kit, changes, we end up going through an API review process. So a lot of what I spent like probably a third of last year was actually going through multiple rounds of different API reviews, because we want to make sure like that's our product in many ways. And so we take it very seriously, and we have like the entire terminal team comes and we talk through what these public changes are going to be, and then we'll dog food them. So once we then, cool, API was approved, now let's go implement the changes. Next step is actually dogfooding the change. So that's where we take the updated SDK, and I go to other iOS engineers in the company. We give them a skeleton app, and we're like, okay, we want you to create this flow. So like one of the flows we did was, hey, we now have this concept of a location. A reader can be tied to a location. Can you create a flow such that you can send in a location parameter to this reader so it's registered to this location upon connection? And we gather their feedback, and sometimes we end up totally changing APIs, and then we go through the entire process again. We go through another API review, we try to dog food again, and then we go into what is called a private beta. So private beta is where we select via account managers actual users that are going to get basically early access to this SDK. And the idea there is because these are new APIs, there's been pretty significant changes. We also did a lot of work on the back end again to sort of support this globalization of the config management, as well as allowing us to associate readers with a location, which we, for this reader type, weren't able to do previous. We end up working with usually 5 to 6 users initially. And a lot of the work sort of leading up to that private beta launch is us smoke testing our SDK. So we'll have 1 to 2 days of basically manual testing, because it's not easy to automate testing when you're working with physical hardware. And the idea is that this is after all the dog fooding, we've incorporated all the feedback there, we have caught as many bugs as possible. Now we go to the smoke testing phase, where again, this is like our last chance to really catch bugs before we cut the SDK, if you will. Assuming that all goes well, then we cut the SDK, we bundle it, and we upload it onto the way that we sort of release, because again, we're not an app. We don't live in like the App Store or Google Play Store. We upload a link onto like an S3 server, and then you can download it via docs, that if you're part of the private beta, you have access to this link basically. And that at a very high level is sort of the process that we're moving through. Now, this is because we are a new product, right? And we're launching in these countries. So you're not seeing as much of sort of like the maintenance role in there, or like a regular release cadence, but that's because terminal is only 3 years old, which compared to the rest of Stripe is quite new. And we start with private beta because the moment we're not beta, it's harder for us to make breaking API changes. Whereas with beta, like legally speaking, we're like, hey, once we're off beta, you have to move off beta. But it gives us more flexibility. And sort of the next step, which is what we're in right now, is we're talking to users who are using the private beta, again, seeking more feedback. Are there APIs missing? There have been a couple bugs that have been caught by users. Are there things that you would want to see that you're not seeing? So that's another thing I like about Stripe, is we talk and meet with users all the time, because our user at the end of the day is another engineer, because we're creating SDKs.
Okay, yeah. But is this like pretty standard for most companies, like this whole process, or is it just Stripe?
This is pretty specific to Stripe. I would say and talk about projects that I've done at other companies, and I realized I sort of started speaking high level as to the Stripe process, but the process I just talked through is exactly what we did in order to launch in UK and IE, were our first non-US users, at least for this card reader type. And then we went through, launched in Germany, France, Netherlands, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. So we like sort of iterated, and each one of these regions needed slightly different things to be added to the SDK in order for us to launch, but it was a very similar process. And I work with PMs in order to get, okay, what are the requirements for this? There's reasons why, like UKIE, we went first because we're like, cool, English speaking, language doesn't have to be taken care of. Great. Now that we're going to France, Germany, and Netherlands, we now need to make sure that language are properly handled on our reader, right? So that was like the incremental there. I would say in terms of other companies, there's still a similar sort of like iterative release process, but rather than seeing this dog food private beta, it's more internal dog fooding of like, cool, I added something to an app. I'm going to turn the feature on. Our actual employees can play with it. They can put in bug reports. And then it's going out with most apps. So like at Uber, we would release every single week. Great. Now we've released to public. I will slowly turn on this feature for more and more people, monitor my like alerting and crash reports around this feature. So it's different in that a lot of the feedback ends up coming, it's more opaque. It's less, oh, I'm not, which we did at Uber too. Like we would do user studies with UX research, but a lot more of it was we'd maybe send out surveys or we'd try to look more at analytics because the numbers are just so much greater, right? Like the moment you open something up on the Uber app, great, millions of people use this app, so your sort of feedback is much more data. Whereas for us at Stripe, because we're an SDK and we launch to like 6 users at a time, we have a little bit more of that personal, okay, we're actually going to email you and maybe hop on a call with you to hear what's going on.
Okay, so more into like your daily life, like what kinds of non-programming things do you do
So
on a
many.
day-to-day basis? So many, yeah.
Yeah.
Like you can talk about the most exciting ones then.
Most exciting. Oh, God. Depends what you think is exciting. So because I'm 7.5 years into my career, I'm doing more on sort of like the leadership and tech lead side. So a lot of my time is spent making sure, working with PM, making sure we have really clear expectations as to, hey, this release is going to contain this. This is our goal. Here's why we're adding these features. Working across different teams, because a lot of times we have dependencies outside of our team, and making sure that, hey, here's our timelines. Here's what I need you to do by XYZ date. And then I would say the other thing is, and again, this is Stripe specific, I spent a lot of time in API review. So really thinking through, what do we want to enable our user to do, and how can we create an API that enables them to do that? So like most recently, I told you that we added a way to register this reader to a location, but we didn't give away through the SDK, they would have to do it on their backend to create locations or fetch locations. So that's one that we're currently thinking through. And like, I'm not always the person writing the API review, but I go to all the API reviews and very much in like the voice of mobile, because we have different constraints than like a JavaScript front end. So I would say that's actually a lot of time as well. And yeah, a lot of it is spent sort of in like slightly higher level architectural conversations, even if I'm not the one that's actually implementing the code. And then obviously I spend
like system architecture.
Yeah, system architecture, even sometimes a little bit lower. Not like when we say mobile, since we're within an SDK, it's often not at the level of like different systems, but even thinking through, okay, I have all these different objects. What's the role and responsibility of the object? Where should this functionality live? How do I make sure I have a good separation of concerns, make sure it's reusable? We actually just, for the first time ever, refactored part of our SDK, which was huge, first time in 2 years, I guess, 3 years maybe.
What exactly does that mean, refactoring?
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll make an initial version of something and you'll realize that it's not serving your needs or it's falling short in some way. Abstractions are leaking, it's not reusable. Oh, I need to do this thing, but that's going to require me to copy and paste basically this entire thing because I haven't like abstracted it into a class that can be used in 2 places. So refactoring just refers to, okay, we have some code. I still want the same functionality out of it, but I want it to be written in a better, safer way. So I'm going to refactor it. And so that's actually what me and one of the other iOS engineers have spent the last 2 months on. It can sound a little bit monotonous, but a lot of times it's actually some of the most difficult work you'll do because you have to maintain the functionality of what pre-existed and not break anything. It can be a little scary too. But yeah, so that, sorry, I don't remember what I was speaking about before talking about refactoring.
Sorry, it was like non-programming things in
Oh,
general.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is just really thinking about architecture, working with other engineers. Again, because I'm leading a project that spans multiple teams, multiple engineers, sort of some of the more like organizational and really driving that project and making sure that I'm unblocking other people, I'm getting them the answers they need. Like this might sound a little bit like a product manager, and it is at some companies would slightly be owned more by a product manager, but we run really lean from the PM side. And so engineering ends up doing a little bit of that as well. And sometimes too, it's like working with our hardware provider. I spent a lot of time there. So they're in Hong Kong, which is a fun time zone difference for me. So it could be filing bugs on them. A lot, I think also, as I mentioned, we don't have the best automation right now. So smoke testing and just constantly testing new things actually takes a fair amount of time. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I think I have a pretty good idea of what you do. I've got one last question for you.
Okay.
There's a lot of like high school students like me who want to get into tech but don't know where to start. So do you have any advice for them, like opportunities they can do or just general things?
Yeah. So first, I would encourage if your secondary school does provide any sort of programming class, go take it. Or if there are any clubs. So I don't know if this is in the UK, but like One Robotics is really big in the US, and that's one that, or First
Oh yeah,
Robotics.
I do something similar.
Okay, cool. So I know a lot of friends that like got into it before even being in college. That's sort of like where their inroads were. There also are some places like Microsoft does an internship, I think for high schoolers in the summer. I would look into that. I think Intel might do one. Seeing if there's any way that you can get internship experience even before college. And then the other thing I would do is start trying to get experience through that. There's also a lot of tools to sort of just dabble. Like I know you like have your own website, doing side projects and dabbling. And there's a lot of free materials online that teach programming. So that's another way too. But then also when you're applying to colleges, looking for places that you can apply directly into the computer science major is something else that I would suggest. I think Google also does. Like a lot of these companies actually do high
Yeah,
school.
I've been looking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of those. Yeah, they're probably pretty competitive, but if you can do anything just to get into one of those, that's awesome. Also great resume builder for the college applications. But um, and I would say also like I think if I'd known that I wanted to do computer science, I would have looked more into like, okay, what schools have really good computer science programs. I just by luck ended up at a school that has a very good
Oh
computer
yeah,
science
UW is
program.
really good.
Yeah, UW's very solid. So I got very lucky there, because I will say it can't, if you go to a school that's regarded as good for computer science, that will help open doors to then the
Yeah.
internships that you will do during school. And I hate that that's the case, but it is the reality a little
Mhm.
bit. So like one thing if again, I lucked out, but like this is like very lucky that I just happened to be at a place that was top, like 15, 10. But if you really want to do it, definitely also working hard to make sure that you can go to one of those schools is going to
Mhm.
really help you achieve your goal there,
Okay.
which
Well,
is hard.
that's it, I
No
think.
pressure.
No pressure. Yeah, just
Gotta
get
get
into
the
a great
honors.
top computer science school. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, there's a lot though. And I mean, the cool thing is, I think unlike liberal arts, it spans multiple, like you have, like, if you look at your top 15, at least in the US, I mean, in the UK, right? You have Oxbridge, Imperial is really good for engineering. Even University of Edinburgh is like good for engineering as well, at least computer engineering. I had a friend
Oh
that
yeah.
program. But the cool thing is like, even in the US, it's not like, I feel like if you were to do psychology, I'd be like, go get yourself into an Ivy, that's going to be a resume builder. But computer science top 10, it's not just Ivy Leagues. Actually,
Yeah.
some of the state schools are better than some of the Ivy Leagues in terms of how good their computer science program is.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, good.
there's a little bit more of a spread, which is nice.
Well then, I think that's it for my questions. Thank you so much for answering and being here.
Yeah, of
I really
course. Wait,
appreciate it.
this is for a school project.
Not really, well, I'm doing it myself, but I might share it with my school if they want it. So yeah.
Nice.
Um,
Wait, are you the equivalent of a sophomore or a junior right now?
sophomore. I'm in
Sophomore, you have 4
10th.
years?
I have 2 years left after
Okay.
this year.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
that's scary to think about. But yeah.
College is fun though.
College is fun, but like the part before that's not so fun.
I would look at it like this, and I wish someone had like sat me down and told this to me because I was not focused in high school. I just happened to be type A enough that I got decent enough grades to get into UW. And then my entire freshman year, I like didn't drink and didn't party, and all I did was study, which is basically what ensured I got into computer science because at one point it was down to like a 10% acceptance rate, which is crazy. Um, pick like, don't kill yourself to do this, but I would say like having a really clear school goal of like where do I want to go and talking to people that got into that school, because a lot of it is like, are you crafting your story to get into this school as well as keeping your grades and obviously like making sure that, what is it, your A levels?
A
So
levels, yeah.
yeah, you're like getting, you know, because what, okay, my understanding in the UK is that you would go and interview at like Oxford or Cambridge and they'd be like, you need this many firsts and this
Yeah,
many.
if you get in, they give you like a conditional offer. Yeah.
Right. US thankfully is not conditional, so you don't have to worry, but it is
Yeah.
about like maintaining your GPA and, you know,
I will
doing
be applying to both, so yeah.
cool. Doing decently well, and like a lot of it really is crafting your story to make yourself stand out and making sure that you're doing things that are unique. So like if you can find
Yeah.
people that you know that you know, or your parents know that went to Oxford, went to Cambridge. Um, I was telling your mom that my roommate, which is who I'm moving in with next Thursday, he studied computer science at Oxford, and I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you because I also know that like for Oxford you interview for a specific department.
Yeah.
It's slightly different, whereas the US is just like a blanket application, right? But I think something that I wish I had known is like, what does it look like to get into an Ivy League? What are the requirements? Because some of them are just like hard requirements, like, yeah, you need a good GPA. And like, even my GPA was probably not good enough. And my SAT score certainly was not, but I didn't study for the SAT. You can study for the SAT and ACT. It is a
Yeah.
studyable test. I don't know why. I don't know where I got this concept. I was like, it's not studyable. This is just how it is. No, it's absolutely studyable. You have to put in time and it'll suck. I'm going to be straight up. But you can study for it and sort of like help better insure yourself. And then the other part of it is like your essays and
Mm-hmm.
like working with people that have written essays that have gotten into these, you know, or that's why like there's places where you can pay to go get your essay reviewed. And I'm like, yeah, if I felt like I had a decent chance, I probably would pay or something. But I think the best thing you can do is just talking to people that have applied to these schools and gotten in because they know how to craft the story. Because a lot of it is story crafting, which you'll have to do for the rest of your life. You have to do it when you're interviewing at jobs too. Story crafting, like, and it sucks.
Yeah.
It's not very fun, but a lot of it comes down to how can you tell the story and how can you make yourself stand out. But obviously, you have to have the other thing in place of like the grades, the test scores, whatever. But I'm sure you're already like working on that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a lot. But if you can talk to people that have gone to the schools you want to go to, that's I think probably going to help. But the cool thing is your parents both work at companies where there's a bajillion different people from all these schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I can talk to them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
Thank you so
I'm
much.
sure they're already thinking about it. But good luck. And I told your mom I'll introduce her to Owen, who's my roommate that went to Oxford, studied computer science at Oxford, so he knows what that looks like. And he actually ended up becoming Google APM and then worked at Facebook as
Wow.
PM. Now is working on his own thing. So he took a very different route. Like I've always been on software engineering side, but it's funny because I feel like he likes coding more than I do. But like still went the PM route, but he'd be really good to talk to too, just to
Yeah.
think,
Understand.
yeah,
Okay.
but you got this. I know it's overwhelming, but I think, I don't know,
Yeah.
my thing I think about like when I have kids is like I want them to know more than what I did because I felt like I went so blind into college applications and I just got lucky that I chose a school that happened to have a top 15 computer science program. None of that was by me being intentional. Like,
Yeah.
so I want to help my kids be intentional. And if they don't want to go to an Ivy, that's cool. But if they do, I want to know like, cool, here's the things we have to do get you an Ivy. It's not going to be easy, but it's doable.
Okay. I'll stop the